The company says it's the first large-scale recirculating aquaculture system in the state to have received all its permits. However, there is still a lawsuit challenging Belfast's use of eminent domain to secure a corridor for wastewater to reach the bay. Sales of recreational marijuana products jumped 45% last month to over $9 million. That matched the sale of marijuana under the state's medical use program. Recreational retailers tell today's Portland Press Herald their sales were boosted by summer tourists. They also tell the paper they're seeing a more diverse market of buyers. The July retail marijuana sales generated almost $1 million in tax revenue for the state. Portland has announced it will open a cooling center tomorrow through Friday at the Trobe Ice Arena. Masks will be required by anyone using the arena. Lingering clouds and fog may keep coastal temperatures in the 70s today. Elsewhere, partial sunshine will produce 80s. It will be hotter and still humid tomorrow, highs in the 80s and 90s. Maine Public Radio news time is approaching 11:06.
Welcome to Maine Calling. I'm Jennifer Rooks. Hearing loss affects more than 40 million Americans. It is the third most common chronic physical condition behind arthritis and heart disease. Some people are born deaf or hard of hearing, while many others have degrees of hearing loss, especially as they age. Today, we are going to talk about the impact and challenges of hearing loss, as well as the latest developments in hearing aids and other advances. Joining me, Terry Morrell, who is director of the Division for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Late Deafened with the Maine Department of Labor. He is joined by American Sign Language interpreter Margaret Haberman, whose voice you'll hear. She is with the Mary Jane Grant Sign Language Interpreting Services. Also here, Nicole Duncan, a clinical audiologist with Penobscot Community Healthcare, and Deborah Bear Rogers, an advocate for telecommunications relay service with Disability Rights Maine. We invite your questions and comments. What are your experiences with hearing loss, with trying to get hearing aids? You can send an email to talk@mainepublic.org, tweet @MaineCalling, post a comment to Facebook or to Instagram, or give us a call, 1-800-399-3566. And a note, today's program is being streamed live on Maine Calling's Facebook page and on Maine Public's YouTube channel. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being on the program. Terry, welcome back to Maine Calling.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
And again, we are hearing the voice of Margaret Haberman, but Terry is the person who is giving us the information, and he is the person who represents the deaf and hard of hearing at the Maine Department of Labor. Terry, we know there's an entire spectrum of people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and I keep using those phrases, deaf or hard of hearing. Those are right now what is acceptable, the acceptable and preferred terms. Correct? And I'd like you to talk about that. Where are we in terms of how we speak about people who are experiencing hearing loss and who they are, what that represents?
Thank you, Jennifer. The term deaf and hard of hearing or late deafened, that includes so many different people. And we are using the language deaf and hard of hearing. Hearing impaired was a term that was used quite often and is considered to be pejorative. Deaf and hard of hearing is a label that people would prefer most often. deaf and hard of hearing is the acceptable language to use when talking about people. Hearing impaired infers that something is broken or needs to be fixed, and that the person themselves, obviously, if they identify themselves as hearing impaired, then that's their personal choice. But deaf and hard of hearing are the terms that people are using these days. And just to talk about categories of people, we have people we refer to as culturally deaf, who have used American Sign Language, who consider themselves to be members of the deaf community, who may have gone to a school for the deaf, who socialize with the deaf community and use American Sign Language. And then we have hard of hearing folks, some of whom are members of the deaf community and identify with deaf culture. And it just depends on how they've been raised. And then we have folks who we term late deafened, and typically that is a group for which this is the most challenging situation because they've grown up using spoken language. They lose their hearing either acutely and suddenly or over a period of time. And that group can face the most barriers.
And let's talk about that with you, Nicole. Apparently, hearing loss is far more common than people think. The reason we are doing this program today is that Mary Louise Kelly was our guest a couple weeks ago and talked about her own experience with hearing loss in her 40s. And a couple of things struck me from that conversation. First of all, so many people wanted to take part in the conversation. We knew that we had to do a standalone Maine Calling program on it. But a couple of things that struck me is that Mary Louise, Nicole, had no idea that she had been losing her hearing. How common is this?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. We find it to be quite common because one of the things about hearing loss is that you don't always know what you're missing. And so if the people who you spend the bulk of your time with, if your loved ones and friends and family, don't kind of cue you into the fact that you're missing more than you realize, some people might not be too aware.
She said that she always passed the test with the beeps. You're grinning. This is not an effective test, is it? The one that most of us receive.
So it is an effective test, but it only looks at really one component of hearing loss. When we bring someone in for diagnostic hearing testing, we're looking at a couple of factors. We're looking at how much volume does it take for them to hear each of those beeps, the low pitch beeps, the middle pitch beeps, the high pitch beeps, but we're also looking at how does the brain receive that information? So it could be that someone hears the beeps pretty well. Perhaps they only have a mild or moderate hearing loss, but the information going from the hearing organ up to the brain isn't too clear. And so there's different, I talk about hearing loss as there's two components. There's the volume component and then there's the clarity component. And many people have both components of that hearing loss. But I think the way people typically think of it is just straight volume.
And Nicole, let me ask you this. If I'm listening to this program right now and I'm thinking that, boy, maybe I ought to have my hearing tested, or maybe my husband or wife or child or parent needs to have their hearing tested, what are signs that that might be the case, that I ought to look up an audiologist and make an appointment?
Yes. So I think the most common thing we hear from our adult patients who have come in for a hearing test is they say things like, I hear, I just don't understand all the words, or I hear fine, people around me are mumbling, or I just can't make out some of those words. And I think the reason that people experience it that way is that hearing loss, so when we think about an audiogram, when we think about how we test each of those pitches, most people, the most common type of hearing loss, have pretty decent hearing in the bass tones, and their hearing loss really starts to emerge in the treble tones. And we get our perception of volume from bass tones. Our sound awareness, the sense that there's sound present, comes from bass tones. What we get from treble tones is clarity, softer consonant sounds like the S, the F, the TH, the P, those sounds carry a lot of high frequency information. And so if you have the most common type of adult hearing loss where bass tones are good and treble tones are poor, you hear sound present, but you don't hear the difference between fat, sat, that, hat. And so as someone speaking to you, what your brain is doing is trying to fill in the blanks of what your hearing is missing. And what our brain needs is auditory or sound cues, visual cues, and context cues. And we put those three things together to kind of like a puzzle, putting that information together. And so if you're missing some of the high frequency auditory cues and your spouse says, where did you put the keys? What you might hear, what your brain might fill in is, where did you put the leaves? And that's where we all stop and pause and think, well, that's odd. I don't know why she's asking about the leaves, but it's because some of those high frequency sounds are missing.
Fascinating. Deborah, I'm going to turn to you. Nicole mentioned that people often read lips. I think we all do that to some degree. How hard has the pandemic been, the use of face coverings, the use of masks on people who are hard of hearing?
Thank you. Again, I'm Deborah, and I have adult onset hearing loss, so I can speak to it personally. People putting masks on, great reason to have a mask, but difficult to understand. I tell people I read faces and body language, because if you're talking to me and you're moving around, I know we're going this direction. And with the masks on, a lot of times in a grocery store, you ask for something and it's like, it's in lane 6. And I'm like, I don't know what you said. Like, is it over there? Like, so I'm using my body. So that's been one thing that's been very difficult with the use of masks. And people talk quieter and our decibels are down lower when we're speaking using masks.
Deborah, you said this is your personal experience. Do you mind sharing your story, how you were aware that you began losing your hearings?
Absolutely. About 8 years ago, I started graduate school. And within the first month, I realized I wasn't getting what the professor was saying. I would be sitting there, I would be leaning in, I'd be asking questions, and it just wasn't, I just thought it was just too much information. And so my hearing loss, they consider it sudden hearing loss, because within the month, I wasn't understanding, kind of like the example Nicole used. Somebody would say something and I'd be like, I don't know what that was. I don't know why you want to know about the leaves in this class, for example. And so otherwise had no real warning about my hearing loss. I wasn't doing things like asking somebody to repeat themselves until that time. But as my knowledge of my hearing loss has progressed, I've realized, talking to people, it's like, oh, you always text me. You say, don't call me, just text me. Or, I'd have my husband or my kids make a phone call for me because that person at the bank is mumbling. So it just kind of really quickly, started to realize I was missing things. And so I wear hearing aids, and today one's broken. So I'm kind of doing this a little bit today.
And she's leaning into the Zoom. Yeah.
I am leaning into the Zoom meeting. You'll see that though, people with hearing loss, even with good hearing aids, you'll notice the lean in. So that's been my experience, and it's led me to the work that I do. But yeah, it was rather sudden. And then from there, just started finding resources to learn how to listen and hear differently is what I tend to call it.
Terry, when did you lose your hearing? Were you born with hearing, with less hearing than others, or
Yes.
did you develop it?
Yes, Jennifer, I was born deaf. My mother was hard of hearing, and I had an aunt who was deaf, and I didn't learn how to use American Sign Language until I was about 14 or 15 years old.
Wow. That must have been hard.
Absolutely. And in those days, we didn't have what we have now, like making sure that we have children who are ready for kindergarten by having that language foundation. So the important thing is, and the lesson here for everybody is that before we have children going into kindergarten, we want to make sure they have that language base and that foundation of language, whatever the first language is. I want to go back for a minute, Jennifer, if you'll let me, to talk about masks. When we're talking about people who use American Sign Language, we are still dependent on faces because so much of the facial grammar is a part of American Sign Language and visual languages. So it can be a true struggle for folks who use sign language as well.
I want to ask both you, Terry, and Deborah about resources available. But before that, I want to make sure I ask you, and I think I'll go to Nicole for this, about President Biden's most recent executive order that has to do with hearing aids. If you can explain what it does and does not do, why it's so important. Just what I understand, Nicole, and I'm sure there is much more to it than this, is that it will change the way there's expedited rulemaking that will change the way hearing aids are sold, and that eventually we'll be able to buy hearing aids over the counter for less money than they cost today. Is that accurate?
I not really. Let me phrase it differently. You're on to the right idea though. So currently, there's two categories of devices that you wear on your ears that help you hear. One are generic amplifiers, and those are things you're going to find in the back of a magazine or at like a big box store. The other category is prescribed hearing aids, and that's the type of device that I think people most often think about when they think about hearing aids. It comes from an audiologist or a hearing instrument specialist. It's programmed per person based off of their audiogram. What this executive order is referring to is an in-between category. And so if we go back a couple of years, in 2017, there was an act to introduce over-the-counter hearing aids. It directed the FDA to have this as an in-between category between general amplifiers and prescribed hearing aids. And they wanted that in place by fall of 2020. Well, a lot happened in the world. In 2020, and so the over-the-counter category didn't come out in fall of 2020 as the FDA was instructed to do. So what President Biden's executive order is referring to is we need to expedite that. We need to bring our focus back to that and put this intermediate category out. What over-the-counter hearing aids are intended for is for people who aren't yet able or ready to go into the world of prescribed hearing aids, but need more than what a general amplifier can accomplish. They're restricted to people with adults with mild to moderate hearing loss. And when I talked to one of the senators that was a part of this movement, she said she thought of it similar to reader glasses, like kind of a 1 foot into the world of what hearing aids are, not intended to replace prescribed hearing aids.
All right. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of people asking questions about insurance coverage, but the executive order does not affect that. Who is and who isn't covered for hearing aids by insurance, correct, Nicole?
Correct. It does not touch the insurance coverage piece. A couple of years ago, if this is an appropriate time for me to bring up insurance coverage for hearing aids, a couple of years ago, the state of Maine made a great step forward in requiring coverage from commercial insurance companies for people with hearing loss. About 10 or 15 years ago, we made the step forward for children. Commercial insurance companies for children were required to cover hearing aids. And what this law did, LD 38, is it removed the age requirement for the coverage so that commercial insurance was required to cover hearing aids for all its members in the state of Maine. There are some loopholes that we're finding. There are some challenges accessing it. One of the big loopholes is it's a state mandate. So it covers commercial insurances that are within the state of Maine. So if your family is insured by Blue Cross of Illinois, that mandate does not apply. The other loophole is self-insured insurance plans businesses that self-insure do not have to follow state mandates. They have to follow federal mandates, and there is no federal mandate related to coverage of hearing aids.
All right. Well, we do need to go to a quick break. When we come back, comments and questions from you in the audience. We will also ask about resources. This is Maine Calling. We'll be right back.
Listener support brings us Maine Calling with help from Kents Hill School, an independent school in central Maine, helping students in grade 9 to postgraduate year make a difference in the world. kentshill.org. By St. Lawrence Arts in Portland, now open with a full calendar of events. Schedule and tickets at stlawrencearts.org. And by Northeast Imports in South Portland, specializing in the sale and service of pre-owned Subarus. Northeast Imports LLC.com.
I'm Greg Dalton. On the next Climate One, Indian eco-feminist Vandana Shiva on genetically modified crops, industrial agriculture, and corporate power.
I'm critical of the worldview of arrogance, the worldview that came with colonialism, the mechanistic mindset of the conquering man being the creator of the earth and creator of the wealth that they basically stole.
The hubris of manipulating nature on the next Climate One.
Join us for Climate One this afternoon at 2 p.m. here on Maine Public Radio. And join us as we explore Maine this summer. Maine Public's Summer Breeze Selfie Challenge is designed to help guide you to fun spots throughout vacation land. We've placed Summer Breeze signs from Wells to Presque Isle. Simply take a selfie in front of a Summer Breeze sign, post it to social media using the hashtag SummerBreezeME, and you'll be entered into a drawing to win some great summer prizes. Visit mainepublic.org for all the details, or stop by a service plaza on the Maine Turnpike and pick up your Summer Breeze location finder.
Welcome back. This is Maine Calling. I'm Jennifer Rooks. Today on the program, we are discussing challenges and opportunities for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, including talk about hearing aids. My guest, Nicole Duncan, who is a clinical audiologist with Penobscot Community Healthcare, Deborah Bear Rogers, an advocate with Disability Rights Maine, and Terry Morrell, director of the State Division for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Late Deafened with the Department of Labor. His ASL interpreter is Margaret Haberman today. Share your comments or questions. Email talk@mainepublic.org, tweet @MaineCalling, post a comment to our Facebook page or to Instagram, or give us a call at 1-800-399-3566. And a reminder, today's program is being streamed on both YouTube and Maine Calling's Facebook page. Terry, tell us about the resources offered by the state for people who are deaf or hard of hearing.
We have, for people who are still working, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation can assist folks in either keeping their jobs or finding jobs and getting some of that equipment like hearing aids that might be necessary for them to keep or maintain or get employment. We do have eligibility criteria for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and it will depend on what sort of disability and the types of barriers that people have. But we also have a resource guide, Jennifer, that is online that will allow people to look at different resources. We have career centers where people can come in and get information. So any kind of resource that anyone is looking for, if they reach out to us, we'd be happy to direct them in the right way. I wanted to talk a little bit, just going back to insurances and the loopholes. We find that there oftentimes insurance companies are following the letter of the law, but requiring just exorbitant deductibles of people so that it continues to be unaffordable to folks to purchase a hearing aid, even through their insurance coverage.
All right. And Deborah, I want to ask you as well about the resources from Disability Rights Maine and the work that you focus upon.
Absolutely. So disability, I of course lose my voice now. Okay, try it again. So at Disability Rights Maine, part of our mission is to ensure autonomy, inclusion, equality, and access for people with disabilities here in Maine. I work as an advocate for the telecommunications equipment program. Excuse me, that's wrong. That's another program. I also advocate for the telecommunications relay services program. And that's where I know Terry really well, because I work with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or have a speech disability that need access to telephones using captions, whether it's a cap telephone, relay conference captioning, like we can use in a Zoom meeting here, or Sprint IP relay or Sprint web captel. So the work that I do is travel either virtually or in person. I travel the whole state and meet with people and share with them these resources, how they're used, and helping people get set up to these no-cost relay services in order to communicate and be able to read what people are saying in a phone conversation.
And we will provide resource links on our Maine Calling webpage. So if it has been mentioned on the program today, you can go afterwards to mainecalling.org and find that. We'll start with Jean in Poland. Hi, Jean. Go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for taking my call. I started wearing hearing aids for some moderate hearing loss when I was in my late 60s. And one of the factors, in addition to the cost, that I think prevents many people from admitting their hearing loss and then correcting it is the stigma attached to hearing loss, which I think is related to the stigma of just being old in our youth-loving culture. My own experience, despite the fact that I had asked for a hearing test when I noticed I was having trouble understanding people on the telephone, and despite the fact that I opted to get the hearing aids right away, once my audiologist presented me with the evidence that untreated hearing loss is a risk factor for both falls and dementia, I still, when I got the hearing aids, I discovered they made me feel bad. It was like a blow to my sense of self. And it took me a couple of weeks to work through the realization that getting used to wearing hearing aids in my late 60s was almost identical to my experience of getting used to wearing my first pair of glasses when I was in my early 40s. And so since I realized that, and I realized that part of my reaction was my reaction to this stigma, I've really tried to sort of be public about the fact that I wear hearing aids, not in an in-your-face way, but in a casual way. And to try to resist the stigma as a way of resisting the larger ageism in our society.
Jean, thank you so much for your call. And Terry, I saw all three of you, Terry, Nicole, and Deborah, all nodded when Jean was talking. Terry, what words of wisdom do you have for people who may feel this stigma?
Oh boy. Well, avoiding stigma is always, it's going to vary how you do that depending on who you are and what kind of person you are. As a child, when I was growing up, our hearing aids were big boxes that we wore on our chest with wires coming down from the ears. So it was pretty darn obvious that you were different from all of the other kids. Nowadays, hearing aids can be practically invisible, and it depends on what kind of hearing aid you get. Some people also, they don't care and they have something that's easily identifiable. But I think it's just accepting yourself and being proud of who you are. And one thing I will say, you know, some people who are really struggling with this, maybe counseling can be helpful. You know, I'm somebody who grew up with hearing aids. I'm used to who I am and my identity, and I also was an A student in school, and I realized that having the hearing aids helped me to get good grades, and that was important to me. But, you know, I'm a profoundly deaf individual, but for some reason it was helpful to me. And I think it helped me with lip reading and helped me to get something that I valued in school. But I wanted to clarify also, hearing aids are not a cure-all. They don't make you get your hearing back. That glasses might allow you to see back to your normal vision. It also doesn't help with something like tinnitus. And when we talked earlier about over-the-counter hearing aids, I just want to caution people to be aware of the limitations of non-prescription hearing aids. And Jennifer, if I could just also say that there are groups, the Association of People with Hearing Loss, that's a resource that we can post on your website that offers all kinds of tools and also different resources and support of people who are similar to you and experiencing some things. And this is Margaret. I'm just going to ask Terry to repeat the resources again. The first one is the HLAA, the Hearing Loss Association of America. And then the second one is the National Association of the Deaf. And both of those organizations are tremendously useful as resources and as advocacy agencies. The first one, I think, is one that is much more well suited to folks who are suffering from more recent hearing loss, just support groups and workshops and the like.
Nicole, let's follow up on what Terry has said by talking about what hearing aids are like today. What is out there? What do people maybe not know when they think about hearing aids?
Sure. I'd like to start by saying I think one of the very important parts of moving forward in the world of hearing aids is the discussion that happens at the beginning of it. It's very important to me that and the providers in my clinic, that with our patients, we talk about how hearing aids are not a cure-all, as Terry said. They're one piece of the puzzle in trying to help someone improve their communication. As I said earlier, part of communication is the hearing piece. We can help with that with hearing aids, but part of it is how you communicate with your communication partners, being able to see their face and body, being able to add in context so your brain has information to put together. Hearing aids are just one part of that. And I think it's really important for people who are moving forward in the hearing aid world to know that when they get hearing aids, it's not just put them on and you're successful. There's a whole process to it. It's put them on and get your brain accustomed to hearing those sounds again. I talk a lot about that first week or two with hearing aids with our patients where, really you have to put them on and wear them as many waking hours as possible so you can kind of force your brain to hear and accept those sounds and kind of get over the hump of how your brain sorts out what's speech and what's background noise. So I think that's a real important part of the process when someone decides to move forward with hearing aids. Now, your question there was what is available and what's new in the hearing aid world. I think hearing aids are getting really interesting lately. There's been a lot of movement on getting them, consumers typically want them to be as small as possible, as invisible as possible. And they want rechargeability, they want Bluetooth access. And so I think the hearing aid industry has responded in trying to make those things more available. Most hearing aids now have a rechargeable option. All hearing aids now, prescribed hearing aids, are Bluetooth compatible. So you have the ability to talk hands-free from your phone or stream music, podcasts, news, things like that from a phone. They're getting really interesting, I think.
We'll go to Lori, who's calling from Northeast Hearing and Speech. Hi, Lori, go ahead.
Yes, hi, this is Lori. Again, yes, I'm from Northeast Hearing and Speech, where I'm the executive director. And I, first of all, want to thank you for doing this. I am so impressed with your panel there. And I'm sitting here in my office by myself nodding along to Nicole's speech. But one of the points I wanted to make is that we know now that there's a really strong link between untreated hearing loss and cognitive decline. And this is something that Jean talked a little bit about, and then Nicole kind of got at this when she talked about how you use your brain to process sound, particularly sound and noise, and how it's important to get a really comprehensive hearing evaluation as opposed to just the beeps. I really just want people to know, for that reason, we really encourage people over the age of 55 to get their hearing tested early on instead of waiting until they're having difficulty, so you can kind of establish your baseline, and that allows us to track changes over time. So the earlier the hearing loss is identified, the more able your brain is going to be able to adjust to that sound, as Nicole was just referencing. So even if you're not experiencing hearing loss right now, just knowing your baseline can really be helpful for your future, and getting treatment early on can really make an impact on some of those other risk factors that Jean mentioned and Nicole was getting at.
So you recommend, Lori, once somebody turns 55 to go in and have a test, whether or not he or she believes that they're experiencing hearing loss?
Yeah, it's just getting that baseline. And I am actually 57, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I work in this agency and I'm still having a hard time getting myself downstairs to get tested. And I think it's that stigma and that fear that you're going to need hearing aids. But knowing, because I've been hearing more about it in the last couple of months, knowing that it influences my cognition down the road is more likely to get me to, like, I just need to find out now, instead of waiting until, years down the line, like my mother did, with someone who didn't get hearing aids until she was in her 80s. And now that I know how important it would have been early on, I would really want to pass that along to other people, that anyone over the 55, it's just like any other preventative health measure. You go in and you get tested and screened for other things, but getting your hearing tested can be something that you can do now, as a just kind of a good health measure of keeping yourself the best that you can be.
Lori, thanks so much for calling in. And Nicole, I'll turn to you now and talking about, she used the phrase cognitive decline. I understand undiagnosed hearing loss can affect somebody's memory, can affect also mental health.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when someone's experiencing hearing loss, kind of the natural thing that happens over time is they start to pull back from their world. They start to maybe socially isolate a little bit more. I'm sure this is heightened with pandemic issues. But as one starts to isolate, other parts of the body change. There are medical pieces and mental health pieces that change when you are isolated from your community. With my adult patients, I talk a lot about when they're making the decision to go forward with hearing aids. I talk a lot about, like, what does their social scenario look like? Are they wanting to have their kids and grandkids over for dinner, or are they pulling back from that? Or if their family is present and sitting at the dinner table, are they just off to the side smiling and nodding? Those types of things, I think, are one of the largest contributors to changes in mental health and dementia and cognitive decline and all of those components.
We do need to take another quick break. We are talking about hearing loss on Maine Calling. More of your comments and questions when we come back.
Listener support brings us Maine Calling, with help from Maine Local Living School, nurturing the human-earth relationship through outdoor learning, offering a family sustainability stay and the Living in Maine semester. And by CEI Maine, from heritage industries to the next big idea, providing advice and capital to help businesses grow. Learn more at CEIMaine.org.
I'm Robin Young. Should those who choose not to get vaccinated against COVID have to pay, say, in lawsuits or higher insurance? Medical ethicist Art Kaplan thinks yes.
If you won't do it and you're causing healthcare costs to explode because many people who won't do it wind up in ICUs, then charge a bigger premium.
Next time, Here and Now.
Stay with us. Here and Now, upcoming shortly at 12 noon today here on Maine Public Radio. Maine Public is pleased to be a media sponsor of the Portland Chamber Music Festival. The festival's 28th summer season runs from August 15th to the 21st. It features artists from around the world performing visionary programs and celebrating the joy and intimacy of live chamber music. For complete details on this year's program, please visit mainepublic.org and click on Events.
And welcome back. This is Maine Calling. Today on the program, we're learning about the prevalence of hearing loss. Joining us, Deborah Bear Rogers with Disability Rights Maine, Terry Morrell with Maine's Division for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Late Deafened, and Margaret Haberman, an ASL interpreter, is interpreting for him. Also here, Nicole Duncan with Penobscot Community Healthcare. Join our conversation at 1-800-399-3566. Send a brief email to talk@mainepublic.org, tweet at Maine Calling, or post to our Facebook page or Instagram. And a reminder, today's program is being streamed live on Facebook, Maine Calling's Facebook page, and on YouTube. Going to go to a couple of emails that have come in here, if I can find them. Here we go. This is from Paul. I need a hearing aid. I appreciate the fee for exam, but overall costs are extreme. I am waiting for a disruption in an overpriced business before I seek help. Nicole, what does it cost?
So I agree, hearing aids are quite expensive. And I think anyone working in my field, we're in this field to help people, and we all really we're horrified sometimes when we have to talk about the cost of hearing aids. So a pair of hearing aids in our clinic ranges between $2,500 and $5,800 for the pair. What changes the price from a lower price to a higher price is really related to how many features the hearing aids automatically have to help in difficult listening environments like social background noise. So the more quiet and calm someone's listening environment, daily listening environment is, though they're going to do all right in a lower end hearing aid. The more social noise or employment related noise, like I think about a realtor showing a large empty echoey home, the more difficult their listening environments are, the higher end hearing aids they need to look at. But that is generally the range between $2,000 and $6,000 for a pair of hearing aids. Cost is certainly a barrier. I think we're making a lot of progress moving forward in trying to address the cost issues. In my clinic, we're very motivated to try and connect people with resources, whether it's the Department of Labor's resource or Disability Rights Maine's resource, or figuring out how to access their insurance benefit that they might have. We also have a scholarship program in-house for people who can't afford hearing aids and aren't eligible for any of the known programs, where we can refurbish a donated hearing aid for them at no cost. So my point in saying that is I don't want cost to be a barrier from someone seeking at the testing piece. A lot of people say there's no point in getting my hearing tested because I know I can't afford hearing aids. There's a lot of resources out there that we can try and connect people with for that.
And Deborah, I know you wanted to follow up on that.
Yes, hi. At Disability Rights Maine, we do have the telecommunications equipment program, which in addition to providing specialized equipment like a cap telephone or an amplified or big button phone, there's a hearing aid program that people who are over 65 and meet certain eligibility requirements can apply for as well. So I know that's another resource that'll be on your website, but that is another option for people that can get one hearing aid. Also in our program, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say also in the TEP program, they can be talking about getting a pocket talker, which is an amplified device. That's another thing that can be connected to a phone. So there's some different resources out there that definitely can help, even for the people who can't quite get to that buying a hearing aid point. There are some other resources available.
All right, we'll go to Dan calling from Portland. Hi, Dan, go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Dan Abbott. So
Hi,
we know
Dan.
each other. The reason I'm calling is because I have hearing aids. I've had them for 2 decades, and they're the expensive ones. I have this profound hearing loss above a certain frequency. And one of the things that I wanted to reinforce is that hearing aids don't give you that hearing back if it's profound enough. And one of the problems is that even with hearing aids, I can't hear most smoke detectors and many other alarms as well. And that's something I think people should be aware of, because there are some alternatives. You can find smoke detectors with a lower frequency, and you can buy a device that will hear a smoke detector and then make a sound at a lower frequency. But no matter what you do, even with hearing aids, there are some things you just can't hear if you have a loss above a certain frequency.
Dan, thank you for calling in and for that bit of information. And it's nice to hear your voice. We'll move on. We'll go to Pat calling from Bangor. Hi, Pat. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm calling. My husband's in the process of getting hearing aids, and he's using the trial pair to get used to them. One of the problems he has is that he wears glasses and then with face masks. It's not unusual for the hearing aid. It's behind the ear type will fall. And it strikes me, for something so expensive, there ought to be a way to make them safer from loss. Any
Pat,
suggestions?
As you were talking, all 3 of our guests were nodding. I can see all 3 on Zoom. Nicole, what do you tell your patients or your clients? How do you advise them to deal with masks and glasses and hearing aids?
Right. So there's only so much real estate behind the ear. So if you have thick glasses frames, we know you need to wear a mask behind the ear, and we're talking about a hearing aid. We need to kind of think through that plan more carefully. With everyone who gets hearing aids from our clinic, we are handing out now a piece that goes behind the neck that mask loops can connect to, so that we're getting the mask off the ear. We talk about everyone who's getting fit with hearing aids. We talk about when you walk out to the parking lot, you need to be aware that when you remove your mask, we need to do it in a way that is not disrupting the hearing aid. There are lots of options to help with hearing aid retention on the ear, starting with a custom piece that fits into the ear canal rather than a standard dome, so it doesn't pull out so easily. There are some people that we need to consider a hearing aid that doesn't go behind the ear. That would be a custom in the ear hearing aid. I'm thinking of people who have glasses and oxygen cannulas behind their ear. There's just not enough real estate to put a hearing aid there as well. So there's a lot in the discussion piece about, in our world with masks and in your world as the patient with glasses, what are the reasonable options?
Terry looks like he wants to jump in. Go ahead.
And also our website at the Division for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Late Deafened, we do have some recommendations of different types of masks. But we want to just caution everybody to know that one size does not fit all. So please just look at our suggestions and try it out. I happen to know, I've had that same experience where I take my mask off or my glasses off and my hearing aid will fall off the ear. So it's an awareness thing. It's a pain in the neck, drives me crazy. But yes, it is a common problem when you have glasses and hearing aids and now masks. It can be really challenging.
Pat, thanks for your call and good luck to your husband. We will move to Booth Bay Harbor and Sue. Hi, Sue. Go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer. I just wanted, I tuned in a little bit later, so I wasn't sure if this was covered or not, but I wanted to let people know my primary provider did not pick up that one-sided hearing loss can be due to a brain tumor. And it's a benign brain tumor, but it's called an acoustic neuroma. So I just wanted to kind of caution people, if they have one-sided hearing loss, please follow up with your provider and get in to see a hearing specialist. And he is actually the one who urged me to go ahead and get the MRI and get it diagnosed and treated.
Sue, thank you. And Nicole, you are nodding.
Yes. So that I think is that speaks to one of the great reasons that people should be seeking out diagnostic hearing tests with audiologists, because we have doctorates in this field. We are trained to kind of look at the responses to the beeps and the speech and kind of look at what are the risk factors for certain types of medical conditions that can go along with hearing loss, or medical conditions where the first sign of it is a hearing loss. And unilateral or one-sided hearing loss is high on that list for things that could be going on.
All right, Sue, thank you for that bit of information. We're going to go to Harrison and Joanne. Hi, Joanne. Go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for this excellent program. I had a baseline done by an audiologist in my 40s. Never had a problem with hearing. Always used foam earplugs and anything I could to protect my ears. Just as your panel mentioned, last year I developed very, very subtle noticing consonants, P's and T's, where I couldn't differentiate. So I went ahead and got an update, and sure enough, I have moderate hearing loss in the upper range. And in the meantime, developed long COVID. I'm finding the ringing in the ears, the tinnitus, the two-tone has increased in volume and intensity. And my question is, do you think that that's a concerning sign that it's getting more intense? I intend to get another audiology follow-up, but I do use my cell phone with a hands-free device, earpods and whatever. I'm wondering if that's contributing to the hearing damage.
Nicole, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. So tinnitus, which is defined as a sound that an individual hears that is not externally present, it typically is a ringing or buzzing or crickets in the ears. It is very commonly associated with hearing loss. And as tinnitus worsens for people, we anticipate that could be a red flag that the hearing loss is worsening as well. There are other things tinnitus can be associated with, certain medical conditions and medications, but largely we expect hearing loss when we talk to people with tinnitus. So yes, a change in tinnitus is a red flag that you should follow up with your provider and your audiologist about.
Thank you for your call, Joanne. Good luck to you. We will go to Paige Ziegler, state representative. Go ahead, Paige.
Good morning, and thanks for taking my phone call. And hello to Nicole and Terry.
Hi, Paige.
Hi. I just wanted to add what Nicole said in regards to, and this is why I called earlier, is that there's it can lead to a sense of isolation and also a possibility of senility at some point. And so the state should be very supportive in preventative care, just like we do with dental care. We should be doing this with hearing issues, because essentially we want and we're pushing for people to age in place. And we don't want people to feel isolated or becoming incapable of staying in their homes. So on the state level, I think it's very imperative that we support the helping with paying for hearing aids, as Jim Handy's bill did a few years ago, but we need to do more. And again, I hope that the state will be supportive going forward.
Thanks so much for calling in, Paige. Terry, thoughts on the state's role in helping people pay and also helping people become more aware of hearing loss?
Jennifer, and thank you, Paige, for that. I think that the state does certainly what we can in making sure that resources are available and offering what resources we can. And I think as an entire community and as an entire state, we need to do prevention work, making sure that people can protect their hearing as much as possible and do that preventative work, and then just encourage people to get the word out there.
And thank you, Paige, for your call. And that is a perfect segue. And I will end with you, Nicole, the prevention work. As I was learning about this topic, I was thinking about concerts I have attended in the past, parties I have been to, is our and my children who put earbuds in their ears. Do you believe there will be more hearing loss in the future among the generations who have grown up with such loud noises?
Right. So that's a category called noise-induced hearing loss that you're talking about. And we think about that for loud employment noise, thinking about, construction workers, truck drivers, even things like lawnmowers can have really loud outputs. Some people are more susceptible to noise-induced hearing loss than others. And it's when an adult comes in, and they have hearing loss, they want to know if it's related to that concert they went to. My typical answer is it's probably a variety of factors. Natural aging process is a big one. Genetics is in there. Your noise exposure is in there. If you ever walk away from a sound experience and your ears feel like you've got cotton in them, that is for sure a sign that you've been around a little bit too much noise. So I think it's very important, especially to our youth, that we lower the volume and we take sound breaks from earbuds in our ears all the time.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. The voice you just heard, Nicole Duncan, a clinical audiologist with Penobscot Community Healthcare. Also here, Terry Morrill, with the director of the Division for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Late Deafened with the Maine Department of Labor. He was joined by American Sign Language interpreter Margaret Haberman, and Deborah Bear Rogers, an advocate with Disability Rights Maine. Tomorrow on the program, bird conservation. This is Maine Calling on Maine Public Radio.
Listener support brings us Maine Calling with help from Seaport Credit Union, providing innovative banking solutions while actively supporting Maine's diverse communities. SeaportCU.org. By Wells Reserve at Laudholm, open every day for science, education, and public enjoyment.
Thank you. Have a good
Trail
day.
map and calendar at
Thank you. Bye-bye.
wellsreserve.org.
Bye.
Observant Muslim women in Turkey.